Hi. Good. Welcome. Welcome to the Business Pavilion. It's great to see so many friends' faces and so many of our partners and our funders and the companies with whom we have been working for many, many years. So it is with great pleasure that we are starting the Fossil to Clean event. When we started this last year. When we came out of COP, we saw that there was a growing momentum on the topic of fossil fuel phase-out. And what we have done is what we do at Women Business. We have pushed to the boundary of what leadership looks like and what courage looks like. And in the past months, we have been mobilizing companies to stand up, step up, and say, yes, we need to triple renewables, we need to double energy efficiency, and we also need to phase out fossil fuels. I have to say that it's been lonely, but now it's not going to be lonely anymore, as we can see in this room, because it is on the front page of every single newspaper. This is the topic. This is where we look ourselves to the mirror and say, if we are serious about climate, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. So this is why we're here today, and we're going to hear from the leaders about this. By the way, can I have hands up who has signed the letter, please? Okay, well, thank you. These are the leaders. Can you stand up, please? Can you stand up, please? Okay, so a big applause to them. Thank you. And so we expect others to also stand up soon, because you have time to sign the letter from here until the end of next week. Okay, well, fantastic. So this is not about women business. This is not about our dear partners. This is about the companies. So I'm very pleased to have two of those that have signed the letter here they're going to address to you. I'll start with the Spanish one because I have a preference for Spain, as you know. So here we go with Javier, although I don't know, you're more Swedish than I don't know anymore, but I'm more Swiss maybe, but here you go. So from Volvo Car, Javier.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here. For us, it's a really big sense of proudness to have signed this letter. And moreover, on the backdrop of the UN Global Climate Stocktake, what we see clearly that we are far off track to reach the Paris agreements. So, very important that private companies support. In our case, at Volvo Cars, we have a commitment. We will be climate neutral by 2040. And in that path, by 2030, we will produce and sell only full electric cars. But it's not only the commitment, it's clear actions as well. So since 2018, that is our base level, our reference, we have reduced our emissions per car by 20%. And we aim by 2025 to have reduced them by 40%. The next milestone is 2030, 75%, and as I said, 2040, 0. But let me give you some examples of clear actions we have taken. We have carved out the internal combustion engines from manufacturing and from engineering as well. We are not designing anymore internal combustion engines. We will stop producing diesel engines next year. Producing and selling, obviously. We are improving our internal manufacturing, Scope 1. All of our plants are already running 100% climate neutral electricity. We are aiming by 25 to finish the transformation, to have the gas as well, all the heating, climate neutral. And I take this opportunity, Maria, if I can take one additional second, how when we set that target to have all of our plants climate neutral, 5 years ago, there was a lot of doubts, even internally, said, oh, we'll be able to make it. It's going to cost a lot of money. Finally, we are there. We have made it. And we use that example with our suppliers, with our supply chain, how we can do the transformation. It's feasible, it's reachable. So I'm always advocating for having clear milestones, clear proving points that encourage and create the right energy in the teams, in the stakeholders, in the investors to see that it's feasible. So let's make an effort to sign in commitments, to set clear ambitions, but as well to have proof points. So finally, I think progressive companies must raise their voices and gather together like in this kind of letter. And I really hope that will be heard, and I'm sure will be heard. Thank you, Maria. Thank you all.
Fantastic. So, yeah, so it's great because at the end we are talking about an ecosystem of players. You know, you are moving, supply is moving, demand needs to move as well. And so that's the movement we want to create. So now let's go to SAP, you know, and Alicia, could you come here and tell us why you signed and, you know, what is your company doing? Thank you.
Hello and thank you. So I'm Alicia from SAP, and I'm happy to be here representing on behalf of our CEO and executive board who could not be here today, but will be here later in the week. So, you know, when we were asked to sign this commitment, it was pretty clear that this was very much in line with our own sustainability ambitions, which are to be net zero across our value chain by 2030. And as with most companies, over 80% of our emissions are in scope 3, and it's really in how companies are using our software. And this is highly affected by the transformations that are happening in the digital world to the cloud. So we have been running for many years our data centers on 100% green energy, but we know that as you know, there's a wave of companies and they're all moving to the cloud, that need for that clean energy is only going to increase. So we see this community being able to drive demand and being able to help with the pricing of green energy, that we can continue to do that and grow and really, you know, reach our commitment to net zero, which we have laid out. So thank you to everybody in this room. I hope at the end of this session there will be even more signatories on board, and I look forward to hearing the discussion. Thanks so much, Maria.
So before we move to the panel, I want to share, I was in a session with Thorsten the other day, and I was so inspired because I heard Southeast Asia companies. And remember, they said, you know, when we're going to build infrastructure, we start renewables, we continue renewables, and we do renewables. And only, you know, if we don't manage to do as much as we can, we could bring a little bit of gas. So this we wouldn't have heard a few years ago. But the issue is that regulation is prepared for fossil fuel industry, not for renewables. And so that's why this letter is important, because it's not that renewables are competitive or are available. Everybody wants renewables, but sometimes you can't have them where you need it. And that's why it's important that there is this signal here, but also that the NDCs include this as well. So with that, without further ado, let me introduce to Justin from Times Magazine. Fantastic interview you did to Al Jaber, by the way, front cover. And you're going to moderate the next session, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Obviously a very important letter at an important moment, and so it's an honor to be able to lead this discussion. We have, in addition to Maria, two other panelists, Jesper Broden from Inca IKEA, so you can join up here. And just okay, but he's still okay. We have one more who I'll introduce later when he arrives. So I'll start with you.
Only me.
Over to you. Let's maybe start from the very beginning. Why was it important for you to sign this letter at this particular moment?
Well, I think first of all, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Maria. It felt a little bit hurtful when you said it's been lonely. I think it's the train that you maybe were one of the first to step on now is getting fuller, and it seems that the people left on the station is getting emptier and more lonely. So hopefully we are doing a good job. Now I think it's quite clear. The main cause of climate change is burning of fossil fuel. And even if we don't start there, we start in the wrong end, so to say. So that leads to, of course, that we need to phase out fossil fuel. Secondly, we are realizing for every report that comes along that we are in a hurry. We need to speed up the momentum, and we need to call that out. So you could say, from an IKEA perspective, we have looked much more on our Scope 3 energy across all our sectors. So we are in a good place. We are invested into renewable energy up to 160% of our own consumption. But of course, in different ends and points, all the way to upstream, downstream, we are all dependent of the old economy. So the sooner we transform, the better. This is the week, this is the COP when that needs to be called out. And I think there is no real grey zone in this. Either you acknowledge that is the problem or you don't. And we definitely want to be part of both the solution but also the acknowledgement this is the problem.
So obviously, you're leading on decarbonization. There's a lot you've done already. I want to ask two sort of related questions. One is, what more can you do to keep going on this journey? And then, picking up on what Maria said, just about the need for regulations, et cetera, that support drive to clean. What can't you do right now that you need more support from policy to get done?
I think I start with what I think we can do and need to do. So I think there are two things. We need to engage in the communal discussion around calling out that we all need to be on the journey of phasing out fossil fuel. Secondly, we need to double, triple our efforts in investments in renewables. So these are the two strategies. And of course, you can say from our company point of view, when we ask them what is that we need in order to do our job better, it's also very clear we need support from policymakers when it comes to permitting to speed up processes that are important and defendable. But in the light of climate change, we don't have time to wait 7, 8, 9 years for permitting. The money is there, the willingness to invest, the willingness to transform is there. The business case looks fantastic. A few years ago, it wasn't. But we were betting on the right trajectory of the future, and today it looks amazing. So I think for policymakers to help us to speed up permitting is one of the most important things we're calling for.
So Maria, I want to ask you a question. Obviously many in the room have engaged with you, signed the letter, and been a part of this process. But, I think from my vantage point anyway, this letter is really remarkable. It's something that would have been unthinkable not so long ago. So I would just share maybe the journey of coming to, the idea that you should do a letter like this, and then the journey of actually engaging folks, how you approach that, which also might be, a good forward-looking idea about how you engage going forward on these things.
Well, thank you. So Women Business is a coalition, and we have a set of partners that are very committed. And I have here Hala with us, who's always with us, who's always carrying the torch. We see the Climate Pledge, Amazon, another partner. We see WWF here, that is another partner. For some of our interventions, some partners are more aligned, but the others don't stop us from doing that. And for some, it's hard, some of the things that we do. And I find that that's what makes the coalition so special, and that's why IKEA Foundation, which started this coalition 10 years ago, was so visionary, because it is not about what a company does or even one of these organizations do. It is about the movements we create. Now, we try to set the North Star. For us, the North Star at the moment is that companies need to set plans to phase out fossil fuels, like we are hearing that some companies are doing it. And companies feel comfortable if they see others doing the same as well. So some take the lead and others follow. And as you know, those followers are so important because those make the masses, right? And so it is not only about companies, it is also about the wider scientific community. It is the youth, it is the employees. There's lots of groups which we touch upon. And so that's why when we do these things, the beauty is that this letter was signed by 200 companies, but it is also that it's aligned with the health workers, with the finance institutions, with the mayors that are pushing in that direction. So, yeah, obviously climate is such a big issue. And but then you start to break it down into pieces, and then you start to tackle those. This piece is 10 gigatons. We're 20 gigatons short on the global stocktake to 2030. Renewables efficiency and fossil fuel phase out can do 10 gigatons. And this is what we're here for, to get to those 10 gigatons. I'm very hopeful because renewables are going so well, and because we're seeing that there is a country commitment. Now, there are 196 countries here. And let's see, what is the ability of the presidency to push them to the boundary. But yeah, well, this is the start of a movement, and please remember this time, down the line. And this is when this started, and it's thanks to the leadership of many in this room. Thank you.
Well, I was hoping to get Mr. Gorison on this too, but I'd like to hear from both of you on this question. I often talk to business leaders, even some here who are committed on climate, who say, oh, well, the negotiations don't actually affect my business that much. Of course, I'm concerned about the regulatory space and the markets where I operate, but I'm not following the UNFCCC negotiations. Why is that the wrong attitude? Thinking about this letter, thinking about the discussions around fossil fuel phase out. I'd love to hear from both of you.
Well, I think the political signal, this is a moment where all the news, everybody's going to listen. You take any newspaper and the fossil fuel phase out is on the front cover. And it is only during these 2 weeks that it's going to be no? Then it will be more on Time Magazine. Now, this is only the start, because what is important, most important, is that the NDCs are going to be updated. And within those NDCs, they need to include the 3 things. Tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and fossil fuel phase out for certain sectors, because others, we still are looking for solutions. So I think this is the North Star for the NDC update, and in that sense, that's why this COP and this message is so critical. If we only stay with the renewables and energy efficiency, the fossil fuel industry will keep burning fossil fuels. If we mobilize the demand for the change that we need, then and that is included in regulations, then we have an accelerated energy transition.
Well, I think, I fully agree. I think it's important to remind ourselves this is not an incremental change that we're seeing now. I think all businesses, including IKEA, being part of integrated consumption on a massive scale, it's just like any hard-to-abate sector, it's a massive transformation of the whole business model that we're going through. And, again, acknowledging the issue, there is no excuse for not taking on that in any industry, so to say. What we're asking regulators for is basically to help us, and except for helping us to align and simplify the reporting of it, which I think most of us see as an absolutely necessity, it is basically setting up the transformative landscape of carrots and sticks in the new economy. Remove subsidies of the old, incentivize the new, and the change that we are doing. Look at Volvo, who is basically, without, I think, giving an excuse for that, acting on its own compass. But regulators can help us do all of this at a much higher pace. So I think we are here, and it is a little bit disappointing, to be honest, also on this COP, that we are still not able to connect as good as we could, being so close to each other, policymakers and business. But I hope that we, going forward, all of us can carry that message, that if we would be in the same room, we would be able to find spaces to set that transformation up even faster.
It's great.
Yes, and I wanted to welcome José Manuel Entrecanales from Acciona to say a few words, because yesterday we were in this room and he said something that really stuck on my mind. This is an opportunity. This is not something that a business person does because they want to be a leader. No, it's just because you want to do business. So here we go, José Manuel.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning. Hi. How are you? I was hearing this fascinating conversation. Sit down. And I was kind of thinking about a number of comments that you've made. Well, for those of you who don't know who we are, we're a renewable energy and infrastructure company. And and many other things, mostly focused on decarbonization of the economy. So whatever we can contribute to decarbonization, we see an opportunity and we try to make a business out of it. So far, working out reasonably well. Been at it for now 30 years. To the comment on politicians and the regulatory microcosmos or megacosmos. It's not micro. Fortunately, it's very big. I just found out the Brazilian delegation has 3,000 members. Christ. Just as an example. The question is, if we were sitting here with the politicians...
We are. So that you know.
We were sitting here with the politicians under negotiations. We would decide, or I would decide, in fact, we're deciding, let's go ahead, let's do it, let's try to find the solution before they come to a conclusion, because if we wait for them to come to a conclusion and reach an agreement, which, by the way, I'm not diminishing in any way their value of their effort, but it's a huge effort to have 200 countries trying to reach a common agreement, and by definition often becomes a minimums, the envolvente de mínimos, I don't say
the minimum denominator.
The minimum denominator effect. It's by definition. So we, the private sector, need to go ahead, particularly those companies which have an objective in making, not only on your moral standards, but making a business out of decarbonization. You guys have done a fantastic job of selecting that position, differentiating yourselves on that. If this were compulsory and if it were an industrial obligation, you wouldn't have made yourselves different. You would have been doing what everyone else is doing, because by definition it would have been compulsory. So you would have lost. I'm just bringing it up. You would have lost an opportunity. My point is, we need to find the opportunity. The opportunity is there, so we need to go ahead. The forward-thinking companies need to be thinking 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, and then regulation will come and will affect the remaining, whatever, 80, 70, 50% of the business ecosystem. But for those who are wanting to be ahead, it's essential that we don't wait for the regulatory results. And to finish, let me talk about our case for a minute. We have we have a commitment, which we reached a couple of years ago, on an industrial company like us is somewhat threatening and aggressive, which is eliminating all fossils by 2040, so being net zero. We probably will advance that, but it depends on an exogenous factor for us, which is the availability of alternative, either electrical mobility or HVOs to move the machinery that moves the public works, which needs to be moved. The great thing is that if we create the demand, the supply will come. So there will be good piling machines that work electric, which there aren't. Good tractors that will work electric, which there aren't, or sufficiently competitive. So we need to get to produce the demand. And if we produce the demand, we will be able to advance that 2040 objective probably to 2030. And I am very confident, as the way I see it's evolving, that that's soon going to happen, and that we will have the opportunity to accelerate our commitments to sooner, to earlier dates.
Over to you. Yes.
Thank you. So I want to come back to some points in there in a minute, but first I want to bring in Norbert Gorsen, Deputy Special Envoy for International Climate Action, as you can, at the Federal Foreign Office in Germany, as you can see on the screen. Just want to ask about your perspective on this letter. How does it shape negotiations? How does it play out in the negotiating room to hear from the private sector on this question of fossil fuel phase out? And I should say also scaling up renewables.
Yeah, good afternoon to all of you. And first of all, I excuse myself for being so late, but I had too many commitments at the same time. But I'm happy to be here because I and we as the German government are very convinced, as you said, just the solution is not a solution of the negotiators, not a solution only of the governments. It is a solution of all of us. So we have a motto for the German Pavilion this year, which brings it to the point, which is ambitious, just, and together. And that means we all have to be working together on that. And therefore, the answer is very simple. Of course, it's of tremendous support and help for us if the private sector stands up and addresses very clearly the expectation it has towards the governments, to the parties, to the conference at all. So, to put it to the point, what is our priorities here at this COP? I think first of all, we have the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement sets already temperature targets which are a guideline for everybody, and therefore you're fully right. Nobody is hindered to go forward, to do the first steps. We all know 1.5, to keep 1.5 in reach needs to involve more action. We are far not there. So therefore nobody hinders you to do what you can. But secondly, because this is a COP where we, for the first time, review how far we have come with the Paris Agreement, and we put the global stocktake, which is the most important decision to be taken here, at the center of this conference. We very well know that we have not done enough and that we have to give more guidance, to be more precise of what has to happen now. And there are two directions. One is the NDCs, the climate targets of parties. The next round has to be more ambitious. This is for 2035. So we want all parties to be more ambitious, come up with NDCs which are in line with the 1.5 degrees pathway. There's enough scientific support available to calculate what that means. The NDCs need to be economy-wide. They need to have absolute emission reductions. They need to involve all greenhouse gases, not just CO2, also just to mention methane, FF6 and other gases. That needs to be comprehensive. That's one objective, to really have this clear guidance as one outcome of the GST decision. The other one is, since we cannot wait for the new NDCs to be implemented in 2035 or in the time before, we need a course correction right now. And that is why the debate has emerged, and the private sector has supported that. International organizations have supported that, namely International Renewable Energy Agency and the International Energy Agency. They both came forward in the beginning of the year that in order to keep us on a pathway to 1.5, we need to triple the capacity of renewable energies by 2030. We need to double energy efficiency by 2030, and we need to phase down almost fossil fuels. In particular, in the energy sector, this is critical and is possible. I think that is the kind of guidance we would like to see as an outcome of this COP. We are here in an oil-producing country, and you can imagine the first two targets are easy to get, or more easy to get, I would say. The third one, and we will talk about that a lot over the next 2 years, is more critical. Because that I also would like to, at the end, it's good to have this letter from the private sector. But we also know this is not the whole German private sector. There are also other forces in the private sector, and we also hear other voices and of opinions. And as a government, you need, you see, we have to work with all of them, and therefore we would like to see this COP to have exactly this kind of outcome, which I just laid out. And let me perhaps finally say one word, because I said the same thing last year in the We Mean Business Pavilion in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's also important for the private sector that a COP and the global stocktake is not just about mitigation. So we have to take adaptation seriously. It's relevant not only to government, it's relevant also to the parties. And number three, we have to look how we finance the whole thing. we know the numbers which are needed for the global transformation. It's in the trillions. It's clear that not only public finance can do that, so this is another task. The private sector has to come in, and of course, it's a collaboration between the private sector and governments. Governments have to set conditions in the right way in order to facilitate investments for a greener and more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. Forgive me, when I'm looking at my phone, I'm looking at the time just to keep track of time. I'm going to ask audience for questions in a few minutes, but I want to follow up on this this point that's come up in a couple different ways. A lot of the leaders, a lot of the companies on this letter are differentiated. They're leaders on this. You mentioned, the fact that this is not, that the private sector isn't a monolith. You hear from other voices. And so I would just be curious, how you communicate, on this, that this is the voice of the private sector that, that negotiators should be listening to, that policymakers should be listening to. How do you balance that, for the private sector voices on this panel, and then, for the government voice, how do you how do you balance those different voices and perspectives that you're hearing? So we can just go across the line on that one.
Well, I'm not sure if we balance, to be honest. I think, first of all, thank you for being here. It's really providing a lot of clarity and hope also in the approach that you're taking, and big respect for the negotiating ongoing. Maybe my response would be, I think, in the topic of where we're all headed now, I think there are, of course, not everybody has signed up to the letter, and as such, as a government, I acknowledge, of course, you need to represent the community. At the same time, when it comes to Paris Agreement, I guess if you don't acknowledge climate change as an issue, and if you don't acknowledge Paris Agreement, I don't know enough about politics, but do you need to compromise with that in the society? Of course, there needs to be a transformation that ensures jobs, the progression of economy, independence of energy, and many other topics. But I sit with an open question to say, in what way can we in the business community, who might belong to the front runners as well, how can we support you? And maybe even to say we are here now on the ground together in Dubai. Is there any way we, from a business community, together with organizations like We Mean Business, can support you in the progression? If I'm allowed to ask a question.
Well, yes, you're allowed to ask a question, but I would also love an answer to my question, but from everybody. So I think that is a very important question, though, of course, and like the critical question here, which I hope we do get an answer to. So I feel free to respond however you'd like.
I think you're right. The Paris Agreement is ratified by 195 or 196 whatsoever parties, of course, to all important industrialized country, including our government, and it's not questioned at all. And it has these long-term clear objectives in it, and there's of course exactly the kind of argumentation we take. And I think one problem is really the time dimension. So election cycles are 4 or 5 years, and when we're talking about 2030 or 2050 targets, it's more difficult to make the point that you have to act now. Also, we have, of course, other crises we are handling with. In Germany, we are heavily impacted by the consequences of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, with the disruption of the gas supply that had to be completely replaced, and I think we were quite successful. And part of the story is, of course, to also let some fossil fuel plants work a little longer. But the other part of it, which is very important, is that we also took very aggressive action to accelerate the expansion of renewable energies. So the idea for Germany is to have 80% renewable energies in the electricity production by 2030, and to be fully decarbonized by 2045. So that are our objectives. In the day-to-day decisions, when we talk about what happens next year, it's more challenging. That's absolutely true. And that's where I think the private sector can come in and could demonstrate we are here, we have the solutions are viable, they are economically feasible, they create jobs, they create also sustainability. So that has to come very clearly on the table. And then, of course, this is the balance which is then taken among the various ministries in the end. But we have, as I said, in Germany and in the European Union, very, very clear directions bound in law. The climate neutrality, both in Germany and the European, is fixed in law. So there is no way out of that. So we may think about a year, but not about the whole period. Mike, the second question is how can you help us? That's a very good question, and I really would like to think about that with you. I'm not sure whether we should do that right publicly here now. How to do that? But there's a lot you can do. That's what I can say. In particular, being here in this region, in this country, we see the forces everywhere which have a different opinion compared to what you may have in your mind.
Thank you.
Well, it would be great.
Yeah. Since you're here representing the 196 countries, can I ask you a favor? Big role. So could you please share the letter with your counterparts? Because when we send them the letter, they don't know who we are. But if you can call on this and share it with them, at least they will know that there is this effort. Because unfortunately, we are... sometimes we have some people coming from the other bubble. I was this morning with your bubble, but I couldn't speak because there were many ministers speaking. So I think it's also important that you hear, the business that are going to make the future, right? The future we want and the future you have agreed, right? And the ones that are, it's easy what you say, show me that this works. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because the demand sometimes is not there, because the regulation is not there. And so I hear sometimes leaders say, I have invested so much in electric trucks, and there's no demand for it because X, Y, and Z. And some of it is because of the demand of the market, but often it is regulations. So anyway, please help us spread the word, if I may. Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll turn that into a question and then open it up to other questions. But what do you think the sense among your counterparts is about where the private sector is, and do you think it's accurate? I mean, do you think there is need for an understanding that there are folks like the ones in this room who are moving a little faster?
I think that's understood. That's understood, and they are there. I would always advocate to you guys to consolidate a little bit the way how you communicate. I was just in the ICC pavilion because I didn't found this one, and I asked for "we mean business." Somebody there, and they didn't know what "mean business" is. So I think that's the point. So we need a better consolidated. Strong voice from the private sector on a global level to really address. That's the opinion of the private sector. That's what we want. That's what we would like to see. I know it's very hard, but it's the same kind of challenge we have when we want to unite 195 nations. So be sure that I fully know what I say when I recommend that. That would be one important point. If I look to Germany and Europe, we have those voices strongly. There are progressive associations of business which are lobbying with us. There are more traditional ones which are lobbying with us. The main thing is happening. A lot of things are happening in Brussels when it comes to regulation. You have these different voices. We hear them, and I think you're part of this competition of various voices where you have to really. That's my recommendation to work among yourselves, with your peers from the business and private sector community to strengthen that voice, and it cannot be overheard. Believe me, like President Clinton said, it's the economy stupid. So if the business sector comes with strong positions, that will be heard. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
That's great. Okay. Any questions? Great.
So I'm Thorsten Lichtenau from Bain & Company. Maybe a question for Jasper. You mentioned that. Thank you. You mentioned that corporates can do a lot, but policy plays a key role. You mentioned permitting. How much are corporates moving from being policy takers to more shapers? And from your experience, what has been successful in changing the posture over time?
So I'm not sure I am the best one to answer that. There are companies and leaders who are much more experienced than we are in IKEA. We're fairly new into this situation, but together in different constellations of companies like World Economic Forum, who is present here, Climate Alliance, which is it's basically, if I understand it right, the third biggest, if it would be a country, a carbon footprint of the world, with a united voice around this. So there are more and more leaders seeing the necessity for speed, I think. To the point that you're making, I think there's a lot of trust in that we are on the right progression. But we see an opportunity, we see a need, we have the finances, and we are ready to move. So speeding up the transformation on setting the sticks and the carrots for the future is one of the areas. I do believe we are progressing. To start with, I think we are listening and in dialogue more than before. To a certain extent, I think I represent a lot of companies saying we're still wayfinding and making it maybe too complicated for ourselves to engage in the dialogue. So we are in the beginning of that process, and I do see some first signals that we're actually breaking through, possibly also in the energy discussion then instigated by the conflict, the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis. But we see some light in that tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Marcio Viegas, founder of Sustain. Firstly, thank you and congratulations for the campaign, Maria, and the whole team. And thank you to Germany for your 100 million contribution to the loss and damage fund. Then I have a question. What is the proportion of the three actions we have now: renewables, energy efficiency, and fossil fuel phasing out, not phasing down, please? What's the proportion of your actions towards those three key actions on this campaign? Thank you.
Who are you asking?
Maybe Maria can start with that. I mean, unless you have somebody else.
Country level and for the CEOs.
So there's no proportion. You need both. You need to phase in renewables and energy efficiency and phase out fossil fuel. So there's no proportion. But if you look at the numbers on how much gigatons you could achieve by 2030, with those three things, and on the phase out I include methane, that could be 10 gigatons, which is half of the gap we have to meet the commitment. Now, I'm sure there's better data by country, by company, but I'm afraid that probably the panelists have not come with the numbers, unless you have. But I find, they can. Yes, you have the numbers.
I can maybe jump in. I think it's a good question. I will bring it with me as well, because the approach that I think we have taken and that the companies are taking is to look at your scope 1, 2, and 3 footprint. So that is the starting point. So we know today quite accurately what the different categories of raw material, industry, transportation, retailing, consumer and scope is basically based on. And the approach in order to reach to 50% target by 2030 to start with is, of course, to go for your 80-20s in this case. So in our case, one of the biggest impacts sits in raw material. And then you can say low-hanging fruits sits in different ends of it. So we are basically approaching that plan from a 50% reduction across the border. On top of that, we are investing. We as a group have the benefit to invest capital. And we're actually currently under 60% invested in renewable energy as a new business segment of what we are doing. So, which has provided us with an income and independence in our business as well. Then we haven't connected it one-to-one in all ends in our value chain yet, but we are progressing on that. Thank you.
In our case, The scope 2 is totally done. Not because not counting offsetting, of course. So it's actually our own PPA. So it's the origin. Our scope 1 is gone already to about reduced in about 40%. We're expecting the very hard to abate last 10% will be reached at this stage by, say, 35. We expect that we will be able to advance that, but that would depend on the availability of electrical, as I was saying, electrical machinery. And my point there is we need to make a lot of noise for the manufacturers to feel that there is, this is not mathematics. People have to feel the warmth of demand. They have to see that there is people demanding it, that there is, if they come up with a product, the product will have an impact, will be profitable, and they will be able to scale it up and make it cheaper by scaling it up. All of that, I feel it's happening. And quite frankly, 2 years ago when we established the objectives, it wasn't happening. So in this very short period of time, it's improving very significantly, which gives me a great deal of hope. That will bring us probably to total net zero by, I would now dare to say that I could probably do it by 32, maybe even earlier. But at this stage, with the information we have today, the objective is 40, but that's kind of 2 years old, and the things at the speed things go in this industry and in this, fortunately, in this decarbonization trends in the world, that's probably old news already, which is the good news.
Mr. Gorson, do you want to come in on this? I mean, I think one question that I would follow up to the importance of doing the two at the same time, as Maria said, and perhaps how that is or is not a part of the negotiations. I mean, given that obviously it's much easier to sign up to a renewable clean energy target than phase out, but yet they're both important. I don't know if you have reflections from the negotiations and your view as a policymaker.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I agree. It all has to happen at the same time, as you initially said. But I think one point from what's happening here is important. Today at 2:30 there will be a huge event about the global renewable energy and energy efficiency pledge, and I heard something like nearly 100 governments are already signing up to this tripling renewables and doubling efficiency, which is excellent, which is great. But it's very clear also it will not be all countries, and it's also very clear it will be saying very little, if at all anything, about phasing out fossil fuels. So the picture has to be complete, that's my point, and it has to be also binding. It has to be, everybody needs to be on board. That's why even if you hear today that a huge amount of countries, including the US and UAE and whatever you have, the whole European Union will sign off to this pledge of tripling renewable energies and doubling energy efficiency. This is not enough. It's missing the point on fossil fuel phase out or fossil fuel fade down or whatever it is. Working on the language, and it will not be binding for everybody. So you have in these COPs very often very nice declarations, initiatives, partnerships setting up, and then if you look to the follow-up, it's a little bit more difficult. So that's why we continue to work also after this afternoon to have this also becoming part of a binding consensus decision of this COP. So this is then up to the negotiations, and this is where you all attending this conference longer than only the next 2 days will perhaps put your attention. Where is the discussion? How far do we go? Can we get really a clear decision of the COP, of the UN body to to these energy targets, energy transition targets? If so, I think then you have a very, very clear direction given from the governments. So that's what we have to continue to work on. The pledge is good, but in the end we also have to have a decision of this COP.
So I'll follow up very quickly and then we'll go to Alice's question. Just to follow up on Jesper's question from earlier, so what can business do a week from now, or maybe 8-9 days from now, when negotiations are sort of down to the wire and there's this issue? What is the way for business to engage? What would be the most helpful and efficient way to engage on that?
Difficult to say right now because we don't know exactly in what situation we will be then and where the negotiations stand. But maybe it's remarkable for you also to talk to your colleagues from the environmental civil society organizations. They are very experienced in lobbying also the negotiators until the very last minute. And I observed that the business community is not that way. So you need to establish contacts to the key people, brief them, talk to several of the delegates. Next week it will be, although in the second part of this conference will be not next week, will be also many ministers who will be in charge. They need to hear that very clearly, and perhaps you find arguments how they can convince others and help there. So, but that happens in the corridors. It won't be just meetings like this one, as useful that it is. Next week, in the second half of the COP, it will be more like all these corridor talks, which will happen. So be there and make up your mind. And to those who have contacts too, and perhaps establish new contacts, then you can have an impact.
And let me just make one tiny follow-up, which is, you said be there, and I know a lot of times the sort of business folks will come for the first few days and then leave. So I mean, part of the point is just to be present, which might be, schedules are busy, but for people who can be there, to be there, that's, I think, a very interesting point. Sorry, keep you waiting.
No, Justin, you actually kind of asked part of my question. I'm Hala, CEO of the B Team and a member of the Women Business Board. You can judge by the questions you're getting that it feels like, at least in this room, we are trying to be team courage, but we don't feel like that team is very clear when it comes to the governments. And yesterday we met one of the larger delegations here, at least from an economic size, and they told us it's roughly 3 buckets of countries right now. It's those few ambitious ones at the smallest bucket who's ready to kind of go along these lines. It's the middle that wants net zero, but language like unabated and all kinds of negotiations, and this large economy placed itself there, and then those are not moving at all. I just want to ask you straight out, because we've been showing them the letter, we've been pushing hard, but who do we focus on? Those in the middle and bringing them up to the ambitious one? Or do we try to tackle, some people say the elephants in the room, the ones that are not just there or not anywhere near there? I think we could appreciate your advice on that. We're willing to create the pressure, and we are pressuring our peers, but we need to know how to get governments to be more courageous and have a larger portion there to land this COP where we need to. So appreciate your insights.
I feel really more and more uncomfortable with discussing negotiation tactics here in a room like that. Happy to do that, but I'm not sure whether we should really go in all the details. So, what we as Germany like to do is not only to talk to our peers, but also to talk to allies on the other side of the road. So we are in particular interested to strengthen the collaboration and the partnership with the SIDS, the islands, with LDCs, with some African countries, with some Latin American countries. They all are close to us. So our point is always they come to us, and they came to us in the past, rightly so, saying, but sorry, we need support for adaptation, for loss and damage, and we are suffering, and it's your fault in the end. How can we afford to work with you in pushing the big guys once we have no support at all for our suffering? I think that's why this decision made 2 days ago on the loss and damage fund was so important. So so 1 year ago, just consider that, we had a fight about whether we should discuss that at all at the COP. Then we discussed that, agreed in principle there should be a fund and funding arrangements. Then we asked this committee to work. They did that. Took more time for them and a lot of efforts for those who were involved in that to come to an agreement only 4 weeks ago. And now on the first day of the COP, we adopted that recommendation for the COP to be decided on, and we filled the fund. It's already more than $500 million, which is remarkable. So that is extremely important in order to get more ambitious, more independent developing countries on board. So we need to unblock a little bit this big problem. It's not all. It's as the government community is not all the same. Also, the community of developing countries is not all the same, and also the group of developed countries also is not also the same. Also on our end, there are also some of us who are more advanced and some who are less advanced. So I think it's important to cross the river, to talk to the other side, to bring them on board, to go out of the place where your headquarters is and go perhaps to those countries where you're little involved in and talk to them and see we want to support. But that may also be an opportunity for them to see, okay, the private sector is interested in us, which they all want. I think that would help. That would help. So that's the broad answer. And about tactics, I shouldn't talk here.
Sure.
No. Yeah. Now it's working. The same policy should be adopted by the private side. And how do we disseminate efficiently the sort of more advanced practices? I think there is a key to making very visible success stories. The private sector works more on the carrot, better on the carrot than on the stick in general. So the more the market, our peers, see the carrot, see the opportunity, the faster it's going to move. The stick works too, because there's always going to be laggers, and we need to work with the stick with the laggers. But I would say a majority will work on the carrot. So let's make the carrot very, very visible. Let's make a whole big fuss about the carrots. Let's make it like the desire for every entrepreneur, every corporation, every CEO. I want to be part of it. I want to eat that carrot too, and I can't stay out of that, eating those carrots. That's kind of the big movement that I see as most effective.
It's an important point. We could discuss a lot more, but I know we just have a few minutes. I know we have one question here. Are there any other questions? Okay, there are a lot of questions. Let's do that question. Let's do that question, and hopefully we can get one or two more.
Laura Clark from Client Earth. Just picking up on your... I'll stand up. Hi, everyone. Laura Clark from Client Earth. So just picking up on your point around the corporate leaders and the corporate laggards, at Client Earth we're advocating for national pledges to be turned into real action through legislation, through national climate laws and through climate-compatible decision-making, so that every aspect of the state is required to consider climate imperatives in its decision-making. I just wonder, thinking about how do we raise the level the playing field for those that have that first mover advantage, and how do we tackle the laggards? What do you see as the gaps in terms of the legislation that you would like to have from governments? And we talked a bit about regulation and permitting, but there are other areas, of course, around tackling greenwashing and having rules on that and laws on that. But I'm interested in where else you think that the right legal frameworks can really support those who are leading the way and pull up those who are lagging behind. Thank you.
Maybe I can start. So I think when I speaking from an IKEA perspective, but also listening to the business community at large, it's fairly concrete, to be honest. Obviously the economic incentives are set up for the linear economy for the 1900s, if you like, and we need to switch that. The sooner the better. And what we see today, I would say at least 3 of the transitions, there are so many more going on, but looking at the energy transformation, we still see a need to basically remove subsidies on the old and move it to the new, which would be a great opportunity. I wouldn't say it's the argument for speed, really, because the transformation is happening, but we could get there much sooner if that happens. Secondly would be mobility. We see different in different markets. At IKEA we have an ambition to try to get to already 2025 to get to 100% electric vehicle in our home transports. To be honest, in some markets it's already ticking the box, it's done in collaboration with communities. In some it looks to take a bit longer time because the infrastructure is not there. The third area, which I think is a little bit out of sight still, is the aspect of materials and circularity, where we are now seeing that in order to resolve climate change as such, with all the energy components into materials, so to say, we need to get to a point where we redefine consumption and where we address the core of consumption. And at that point, I think both companies and legislators are way behind. And still, again, putting subsidies that might have been right to avoid landfill, for instance, you put that supporting incineration. But in order to move to circularity, we're swimming upstreams right now because of that. So that is another area where we need to see some progress.
Let me add one thing that I think is very important. It's an efficient, trustworthy, not viable for greenwashing, absolutely solid rock emissions market, voluntary emissions market. That will help. I'm not saying it's going to make the change. I'm not saying it should be used for, as I say, essential that it is not used for greenwashing. It is not going to solve the problem, but it's absolutely needed. That's there to help to get some people moving in the right direction. And for the very, very hard to abate piece, we're going to need it.
We're just at time, but I guess I'd offer Maria and Mr. Gorson that just if you have like a last closing thought, just either on that question or just generally, just to round us out.
Well, I want to take the opportunity to bring Miguel, CEO of EDP, to the closing. Also one of the early adopters, always leading on renewables with incredible targets as well. To reflect Great. Even that it takes a while to get here, right? Yeah. The signage, we will improve them, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. So thank you for just a quick remark, I think, on here at the closing. We signed up very early to the fossil and clean because we really think it's urgent and it's imperative. And I think, to be honest, the EDP is a good case study. We were 80% thermal around 15 years ago. We're now 85% renewable, clean. And we hope to be above 90% already next year, and we'll be out of coal by 2025 and all green by 2030. That's been a strong commitment, and we've been making that going down that path. So completely committed. What I would say, and I'm sure it's already been said, it is important to get all the different policymakers and stakeholders aligned. It's the companies that need the carrots and the sticks. It's the policymakers in terms of setting the vision. But then in execution, I already heard, permitting, licensing, all of those things, the execution is absolutely critical. There's a huge inertia in the system. There's a huge amount of vested interests. And if we don't keep that pressure, and if we don't get the incentives aligned, there will be a bunch of obstacles. This will be a bumpy ride. This is not at all smooth sailing. And so I think really keeping the pressure, really making sure that the incentives are aligned is the only way to really get this done on time, because otherwise there's a huge inertia which will keep us back and keep us from achieving those goals. So I definitely would appeal to everybody, public at large, but also all the different policymakers. It's not just sometimes at the European level or the federal level. It's actually at the national state level. It's at the city level to really take very concrete steps. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Any closing thoughts?
Good luck.
Well, with your support, the motto of our German pavilion is ambitious. It's obvious. Just, I think it's important, particularly also for the private sector too. And the last thing is together. Together, that's what we have to do.
Well, thank you. Very good discussion.